Hi, my name is Leah, host of Take a Space Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Right before we get into the show, I would love to share with you one of the podcasts that I've been listening to recently.
Hey, it's your girl Annette, the host of the Nice to Meet You podcast, where we inspire one another to become the best version of ourselves. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can follow me on IG at NICE, 2 is in the number 2, MEET, U is in the letter U, podcast. And on Twitter at NICE, 2 is in the number 2, MEET, U is in the letter U, pod. We would love to have you over at the Nice to Meet You podcast. We're all about positivity and spreading love and light and being more self-aware so that we know who is staring back at us in the mirror. Will you join me? I would love to have you.
What is one thing that you have learned from this quarantine?
Oh God. Let's just dive right in. Lately, a big lesson, and I mean, when I say lately, I mean like the past week or two.
Okay.
Has been the importance of the illusion of movement, of motion, of space. Because I'm immunocompromised, and so I have been on self-quarantine since March and cannot go to Target, cannot go to the grocery store, that kind of thing. But I was okay. I was okay through March, right up through August, and even early September. I was okay. And then starting in August, we decided to have our basement redone, and that's when they started the actual construction. And so prior to then, I was recording out of my basement.
Okay.
And it's unfinished, but I hung tapestries around and it looked all professional unless I actually moved one of the curtains aside. I feel like there's the unfinished stone wall. Whatever. And but we decided that, so my husband's a college professor and I'm a podcaster. And so between us, we were like, you know what? We need space. We need actual concrete space. My husband needs to work from home so that I can be around him.
Okay.
And I need a better studio space. You know, I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. And so let's commit. Let's make a real recording setup for myself. And so, and it turns out that it's not that expensive. You know, it's not cheap, but we'll be able to pay it off within about 6 months. And so we're like, let's do this.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and commit to this, because I don't assume that the pandemic is just going to evaporate, you know. And so my room's enough that I can also quarantine in it completely if I need to. Fine. And that meant packing up everything in the basement and moving it out. And so as of August, we've had most of the stuff in the storage unit. We've had a lot of sort of keepsakes are stored in our dining room, and that's also where my husband's working out of right now. So now I can't use the dining room table, and we have a couch that's also sort of on the side of the dining room. I can't use that. And I can't use our living room furniture because it hurts my back. I broke my back in 2014, and I can't sit on our living room furniture because there's no back support. And so suddenly my only place to be in my house is my bed. You know, I prop it up with pillows, and it's one of those sort of, it's not crackmatic, sort of Tempur-Pedic, you know, thing where it sits up. Suddenly this is my literally only place to be, is like a 6-foot square area in my house. And I hadn't realized how much that illusion of motion, that I could at least sit at the dining room table to eat, you know, or write letters or whatever, that I could go down to my basement and record. And as well, I live in New England, and so now we're having bad weather start to roll in, so I can't sit on the front porch and enjoy, you know, for more than a couple of seconds before I freeze to death. So suddenly I'm stuck in this very small space, and it's getting to me. It's that literal concept of having space is weighing on me in a heavy way. And I think that's a big thing that I've learned from the pandemic, is that like I had known that depression caused me to isolate, but I had drawn the connection that the reverse would also be true, and that having sort of an enforced isolation was going to cause me to get depressed.
Whew. Yeah, that is, I never actually thought about it like that, because because even being in a 2-story home, being able to leave my bedroom, to go downstairs, to walk outside, to be in the loft instead of being in the bedroom, to work from home, or being in the living room, or being outside, that is, I never thought about that, how much we need that. I always thought of it being outside motion. Like we have to go to the grocery store, I have to go to work, or I have to go and do things. Not even just that I can go downstairs and sit outside on the patio, or whatever the case may be. And so that is something I never thought about. But I just want to jump right in and say thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to another episode of Take a Space Podcast. I am your host, Leah, and I'm here this week with Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Thank you. This is fun.
I love, I'm glad that you accepted the invitation to be on. Your support of people in the podcast community and the groups that we're in together has like really set a legitimate blueprint of what that support looks like. Support people how I want to be supported, right? And I just thought it was really cool that you being, because there's like 5 podcasters that I look up to, like, oh, I want to support like that. And like, you're definitely one of them, because anytime I have a question, I reach out to you. You're like, yeah, no problem. This is how you handle this. This is how you do this. I even remember reaching out to you about the how to access a spreadsheet, or how to put together certain things. And you're just like, no problem. Let me show you how to do that. So I'm so thankful that you wanted to be on. But I wanted to, talk a little bit more about this illusion of motion, and how that plays into now what we consider our new normal. So how, because you have a family, and
too many kids, yeah.
And so with your family, your husband there, how does that play a role as far as isolation goes? Because physically, you're not necessarily by yourself, but you say sometimes you have to self-isolate in your bedroom. What does that look like?
Well, it just I think something that's super important in a house, and moms especially deal with the fact that you don't have a space of your own in a home very often. So dads also, to a degree, although we talk about the man cave and we joke about that as like a more common thing than a woman having her own space in the home. But right now my husband doesn't have his own space in our house either. So it's a sort of an equal measure to a degree. But the kids have their own bedrooms, and they have a playroom, and they have the backyard, right? And other space in the house is shared. And I've been married almost 20 years. And in that time, I've had twice where in 2 houses we've lived in, probably a total of 5 years between those 2 houses, where I had space that was demonstrably mine. I had an office when I was in grad school, and then I had like a craft room at one house that we lived in for a little while. And the value of that, of having my space, the don't come into mom's space without permission. I don't think I can overstate how important that is, to just have just a physical space where I know that, like, if I put this here, this is going to stay here until I move it. And so if it gets lost, it's my fault. I don't have to go on a hunt through all of the various members of my family to find out who to yell at this time. And, I had a studio of sorts. I had an office set up, and that was exciting. And then losing that has been a big realization, because everybody in the family sort of respected that's my space. And so then I was able to enjoy my time with family, and I was able to really enjoy my time to tell them to go away, and that worked well. And so I think that's something that we forget or undervalue, or, as part of being a member of a family, you still need individual space. And especially when you are all quarantined, we've been doing contactless pickup for groceries and drive-through for a pharmacy, and that's about it, and for all of us, because I'm immunocompromised, and that means everybody's immunocompromised effectively.
Right.
And so we've really had to work carefully on setting up. Each person has their own space, and you respect your sibling's room, and you respect that. And I had that, and now I don't, and it's been a big struggle. And for me, this is my third time in my adult life of having an extended period of time of isolation, being stuck home. And so I think in a lot of ways, this pandemic is less traumatizing to me than for other people, because I've done it before. This is sort of, So in 2010, I effectively died. I had complications after childbirth, and I was in a coma for 10 days and big bad stuff. And then I was on home health care, which is when your doctor agrees that you are too sick to leave the house to go to the doctor's office, for 9 months. And so that was a long time of being, and then it was 5 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. And so the fact that nobody died was a big deal.
Wow.
But then the kids could leave, and my husband could go to work, and I was stuck home. And so that was sort of easier, because then at least I had quiet time. I had the illusion of my, alone time in my own space, and then they would come and it would be chaos again. And that was fine. And then in 2016, I developed epilepsy. And when you have a seizure for the first time, before you're on medication, before you're sort of proven that you're responding well to the meds, you can't drive. So I went for 6 months where I couldn't drive. So I could technically leave the house, but I couldn't drive anywhere, go on my own. I wasn't up to me. And so it feels infantilizing. It feels isolating, even if it's not as isolating as we are now. And so for me, it's like, yeah, okay, we're doing this again. And each of those 2 times, everybody else could leave as well. And so now I'm just watching everybody else be stuck at the same time. And so I'm sort of watching them go through the process and sort of talking them through, like, it's going to get better. It does get easier. Just sort of retreat to your corner. It's okay.
Right. That's interesting that you say you've been here before. And I think that a lot of people haven't had that opportunity. So, like, your story is an amazing one. Like, coma for 10 days after childbirth, and then 9 months of just bed rest.
Effectively. Whew. Yeah. I don't recommend it. It was 0 stars. Not fun.
It's amazing to me that people tend to forget that, things were bad before. This is not the first time that we've seen bad. Now, this is probably the first time in their lifetime that they've experienced this level of whatever is going on this year. But we've seen it before, and I think that is one thing during this time I have found that has kept me sane, because, like you, I have been in a place where I was by myself, and even now I have been I grew up in a family. I'm from a family of 10. So I have 9 siblings, both parents, and growing up in a big family to now living on the East Coast, and not really having any family here And so it's like literally me and my dog. And so going from that closeness or that connection to now being isolated, that I used to be able to do things to distract, like you, when your kids would go to school or your husband would go to work, you would say, okay, well, now I have my space. But in actuality, like you're going to be back in the same thing by dinner time. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but what I have found comforting is that I got through those times. Like when I was here previously, when I previously came to Charlotte, I was very depressed because I hadn't been by myself before. And I felt like I didn't have that connectedness to my family because we had been apart for so long. So that attachment was that was rough. And so went back home for a little bit, like 6 months, came back to Charlotte. And then when I was here for about 4 months before before quarantine started. And after quarantine started, I was like, oh, this is just like last year. And so yeah, it's just like last year. Like you just got to find, like, I have I started figuring out what it is that I can do to be better because I have all this time now. I don't have to, I'm one of the blessed ones that can work from home. And so I have so much more time to work on whatever it is I want to work on for me. And so, starting the podcast, starting the business, connecting with different people, actually building genuine relationships and connections with people like you, people like Ariel, like Jules, like being able to connect even with we call them Dis Fam, the other podcasters that I'm like really connected with, and we talk on a regular basis. Where I mean, the Dis Fam and I probably talk almost every day. Outside, so it's like that's my family away from my family, and so it's just like, so shout out to y'all. But it is we get so forgetful because of a new hurt or a new pain that we get. We forget that we've been through this already. We've done this thing. And so how do you stay pretty much sane? How do you stay calm?
Well, that's a stretch. I mean, what helped me was to stay engaged. I have a Facebook group that's super active and fantastic. Just, it's irreverent and random, and and so we have times where somebody will be like, I'm having a bad day, send me the worst, most inappropriate memes you can find, go, or a pet thread, or we have like Saturdays, everybody posts selfies and different patrons choose a theme for that. And so there's sort of a community that has built around that. And that's my favorite place on the internet, like bar none. That's probably where I am most authentically myself. I'm not in sort of podcaster mode, and I'm not in promotion mode. That's just me. That's warts and all, And so having those connections helped. Staying busy with the podcast, learning new things, leaning into new areas of the podcast that I hadn't, better audio quality. For instance, learning how to build this goofy little bedroom studio for myself while my house is where, things like that helped, staying busy and staying engaged, not just stupid tasks, but staying engaged helped. But I hadn't realized, I got very depressed in 2010 when I was on home health care for 9 months, and to the point where I ended up being hospitalized at the end of the year. And in that case, it was a matter of, as long as I was physically ill, it made sense. Like, because I died twice and had profound surgical wounds and that kind of thing. And so it made sense to me. Like, of course I'm depressed. I'm sick. Like, look, what are you going to do? And it was then at the end of the year, it was right around Thanksgiving of 2010, and that they said, okay, well, this is physically about as good as you're going to get. So see ya. And I fell apart because now I couldn't blame the moods and the dark emotions on being sick. Like now I'm just depressed because I'm depressed. And that was pretty scary. And that went to a pretty dark place. And so rather than risking my own life or my family's well-being, I admitted myself to the hospital for a weekend, and that was awful as well. But the whole time, I think from then, like for the following 10 years, I sort of blamed that on, well, I was isolated and that is what made me depressed. And I hadn't realized, like, let me word it the other way. I was depressed and therefore I pulled myself into isolation. But I hadn't realized that it was almost in a PTSD way now that I feel isolated just in the past couple of weeks. Since the basement remodel has started and I've been sort of literally trapped in my bedroom, that this was going to bring on those same feelings and those same emotions. And I'm struggling with, how do I find ways to propel forward and ways to feel engaged again, not just busy work, but to feel engaged again. And I'm not real good at it yet. You know, it's a lot of listening to podcasts and then later going, I don't remember what I listened to. And I knit. And so working on projects and then looking at it when it's done going, I don't remember working on this. You know, so I'm not, it's not a consistent, like I did pretty well the first 6 months of quarantine and now it's sort of faltering.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to one of my friends today, and I, had to say that there were some times where I made great progress during this quarantine or this period of the year. I've made great progress, but then at some points I regressed. And I always talk about, giving people grace to be who they are, giving people that space where they need that grace, because we're not machines, we're not robots, we're going to miss that. And what I had to learn was definitely giving myself that grace for when I do disengage, when I do feel like what is the point? I don't even want to do this anymore. Because maybe like 2 weeks ago, I was getting to the point where I was like, I feel like I'm going to be depressed again. I feel like I'm starting to slip back into those things, but it was, what really kept me from going there was, leaning into that engagement. So it wasn't just being busy for busy's sake, but it was actually the connections that I had, reaching out to them. And I didn't reach out on some, hey guys, I'm getting depressed, like talk to me. It was more so like, well, how can I help? How can I not take on another project? Because I don't want to take on another project. I don't need busy work. Right. But what is it that you're currently doing? And how can I help you level up? Because that's my passion, is seeing people do great and be better. Like being able to, always with my nieces and nephews, so it's like, hey, what are they working on? What are they doing? What can I, you have any videos? Like one of my nephews, like learn how to do a cartwheel both ways with both hands. And I was like, oh, look at you. And, right. But just being engaged where, I'm not being busy for busy's sake. I'm doing what actually makes me happy. I am doing what actually brings me joy.
It helps. There are certain, so as background for me, I'm a clinical psychologist. Okay. I specialize in forensics, but you kind of, to get the doctorate, you go through all of the different types. And so I had to be a therapist for a while, even though I really don't like it. Like I really enjoy crisis work and forensic work and working in prisons and working in the court, but I can do the therapy as well. And there were some really super helpful tricks that I learned. It took me longer than it should, I think, to learn to apply it to myself. But there's some, for instance, when I'm having a rough day, I'll open my phone and find 5 people that I haven't talked to recently and just reach out to them and say, hey, I love you. How you doing?
That works, right? It helps
and
so
much.
much.
It helps because the number of times that they will say, I needed to hear that today. Which makes me feel a little less useless, a little less dark, a little less stagnant. Like, that's powerful. In my Facebook group, if I'm posting happy, goofy stuff, usually that's a pretty good reflection of my mood. But if I'm posting sort of more, it's still upbeat, but it's more like, tell me 5 things you're grateful for, or 3 things, or 1 thing that you're grateful for, or something like this weekend. It was, tell me something that makes you disproportionately happy. Something stupid that just brightens your day. For me, like, one thing is new socks. Putting on a pair of new socks that have never been worn before. Like, I don't know why that makes me happy, but it just does. You know what I mean? And, Concord grapes, which is this time of year for them.
Yes.
Things like that. We build playlists, or I'll start in the group and I'll say, pick somebody in the group that you think probably doesn't realize you think they're awesome. And talk about why. For a sentence or 2. I'm not looking for essays or anything like that.
Right,
but
right.
Just sort of find the positive, because I sit in the negative pretty comfortably. And I call that, my word for that is the brain weasels.
Okay.
The little critters that sit in your head and they just scream. And for some people, that's the intrusive thoughts or racing thoughts or sort of persistent negativity. And for me, it tends to more just be noise, just background noise. Like, I don't really hear words. I don't hear a voice in my head that says, you're terrible, you suck, you're not good enough. I just don't hear anything. I hear like static on a radio station or something. And so, but whatever form it takes for you, what's a way that you can make the brain weasels stop screaming? And one of the ways to do that is to find a positive thought to hold on to, even if it's something stupid like new socks. Because it's really hard for the brain to hold 2 thoughts at the same time.
That's true, because a lot of people are like, well, no, I can, because both can exist, but I think existing in that same space at the same time is what people have to realize. And that's why when I do start to feel those things, I'm okay with feeling the feeling so that the feeling can pass, because I feel like if I suppress it, then it's just going to be bigger later. So I feel whatever the feeling is, anger, regret, frustration, whatever it is, feel the feeling and then get out of myself.
Well, and for me, it's also about pulling the horizon in closer. That when I'm doing well, I'm making plans for what am I going to do next month, next year, in 2 years, which podcast convention am I going to attend next year? Things like that, like big, exciting travel plans or whatever. When I'm having a hard time, maybe I can only think about what person do I want to interview for my show next month, or what episode do I want to release this week, or literally what am I going to do for the next 5 minutes? And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes all you can do is the next breath, and that's enough. Like, you pull in your horizon as close as you need to pull it to feel okay. And it doesn't have to feel great. It doesn't have to feel good. It just has to be good enough to let you keep breathing, because it does get better.
That's it. I think that sometimes we lose sight of that because we don't take the time, like you said before, to reflect like, hey, we've done this before. You've been successful before. You've been happy before. You've seen those things. Now it's getting back to that. And this time may not be the time because we're not great 100% of the time, but we're not terrible 100% of the time.
Right.
It's all about balance. It's ebbs and flows. And so I think that what helps is reflecting and knowing that, okay, I can stress myself out and get all the anxiety in the world to try to plan for next year, next month, or even next week. But if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm planning for after I take this nap.
Right.
Listen, right now, my body is tired. My mind needs to rest. I'm going to take a nap. And after this nap, I will wash the dishes, or I will do something that is going to ease me into it. And this is one of the things that Jason and I talked about on a previous episode about procrastination, because sometimes that some things are so stressful, or we may not see them as stressors. We may see them as, I forgot the word we used. Some people don't see it as stressors. They just see it as like obstacles or whatever they need to get over. But they're like, no, I'm not stressed. I'm not this and not that. But they have a way to avoid whatever it is. And so what has helped me really is having the small goalposts. And then as I'm going through the small ones, working up to the larger ones, so that if I'm supposed to edit all 5 episoes, which I'm not going to admit if that's really true or not in the next week, all I can do is edit, every 10 minutes, like just like get an episode, do every 10 minutes just for a little bit, work on it, get 10 minutes down, come back and do it again until I'm able to get through the first episode. Once I realize the first episode is easy, blow through the second one, then do the third one, then do the fourth one. But I can't say, looking at all 5 episodes that I need to edit and I want it to be great of the same caliber. If I do that all at one time, my mind is just going to be all over the place. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's break big tasks down small. One of the challenges to that is sort of how neurologically you're built. Executive function is it's right here. It's in the right frontal lobe of your brain, and it's where ADHD comes from. It's also where schizophrenia and autism kind of sit, is in the right frontal lobe of your brain.
Really?
They're all a lot more similar than you'd think that they are. And basically, executive function is the ability to make a plan, follow it through, and then assess how well it went. Right. And ADHD is sort of the most obvious example of an executive functioning disorder, that you can't do that in the same way. And so for the most part, like a lot of people who have ADHD struggle with feeling like they're doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. I'm not thinking in the right way. Why can't I? Why do I procrastinate so much? Why can't I get started? Whatever. And the answer is because your brain's wired different. And so that's okay. Instead of, for instance, for ADHD, lists don't work real well. It doesn't help to know, like, okay, I need to do this big task, but if I break it up into these 5 small tasks, I can do them in order. And that works. Lists can be tremendously terrifying and anxiety producing if you have ADHD, because you have such a hard time directing your focus, and which one do I start at? And you start at step 1, but you're already thinking about step 5 because you organize differently. And so it's harder. And so instead, just picking one of those steps, even if it's step number 3 out of a list of 5, that's okay. Instead of thinking of things sequentially, thinking of things as a group. You just sort of have to reach in and pick one. And so, that's one of, I've told people before, like, if you want a really quick and dirty test for whether you are more prone to anxiety or more prone to ADHD, because they both feel physically similar, the raised heart rate and the inability to focus, and I feel I'm showing it like as though this helps, but like I'm showing, that tension and that moving faster than you should, they physically feel similar. So how do you have one versus the other? Well, people with anxiety work better with lists. They like having a list. It helps them feel more contained. And once you get everything written down that you have to do today, then you can start working on the list. People with ADHD often struggle with lists. Like, and I developed it as an adult. When I developed epilepsy, I developed ADHD because that right frontal lobe is where the lesion is from the epilepsy. So I used to run a learning disabilities ADHD clinic, and now I have it. It's great fun. Don't do it. So I used to err more on the side of anxiety, and I functioned really well with lists, and I liked having a calendar, and I liked kind of working in that way. And now I can't do that. And instead I have to sort of take a breath and think about what is the one most important thing that has to happen. Not all of the things that have to happen, because if I do that, like if somebody hands me a piece of paper and a pen and says, write down a list, the first item on my list is going to be write a list. Right? That's a very ADHD thing.
Wow.
And then I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to say this is a long enough list for today. I just keep adding things, and I'm adding things that I'm never going to do. I'm adding, like, I don't know, power wash the outside of the house, or like adopt a dog or whatever. And I'm adding, like, go back and spell check this list, or things. Just, you know, it becomes this like massive undertaking. And then when it's all done, I have a 5-page list that I'm never going to accomplish, and I'm totally overwhelmed by it, and I can't cope. So I've learned that lists used to help me a lot, and lists are great if you have anxiety and you want to sort of contain your day. If you have ADHD, what works better is to think about what's the one thing that has to happen today, and find that one thing that you can start with. And often people with ADHD, the answer is go eat something. Go take your meds, go eat something. And that helps your day get started and get rolling. And once you start the one thing, then you just get rolling, and it builds its own momentum. It doesn't necessarily make sense to other people in the order that you choose to do things in, or how you do it, because your brain organizes differently, but you get through things. And that's what I've learned with, you know, so for me, if I have to get stuff done, I can't think about, okay, I have an hour-long episode, so I'm going to break that down into 6 chunks of 10 minutes each, and I'm just going to work on 10 minutes at a time. That's an admirable, grown-up way to do things that I cannot do. I can't do it. I used to be able to, and I can't function that way. But what I have learned is just open the editing software. That's enough. Just open Audacity. And often, just because what that means is getting up and going and sitting at my computer and, you know, booting it up and just opening the software. And by the time I get there, now I've started the momentum, and now I can get it going. So I don't need a list. I need that first step.
That's really interesting that you say that. Like, this whole time I was like, is she in my house? I don't see. Oh my gosh. Because I make lists because I was told to make lists. Really, that's essentially where it came from. I was told to make lists so that I have an idea of what I need to accomplish in the week. So I have something that I can hold myself accountable to at the end of the week. This is what I have done. This is what I have done for the day. When I tell you, and I'm looking for one of my lists now, because I write them on these note cards, and I'll have it sitting on my computer, just looking at me, and like, this is one of them, and it's just like the schedule for the episodes that are going to be released, or the episodes that need to be edited. And when I tell you, I can't do top to bottom. And so it's interesting that you say, think about it as a group of things that need to get done. And so I may have like a longer date or timeline to get these things done in, so that I can just pick and choose which one I'm going to do for that day. And just by the end of the week, have things as done as they can be, like within like a humanely like amount of time. And so that's an interesting way to really think about it. Like, I never thought about it as a group. I've always thought about it as a list, and it's just like, because I never get it done sequentially.
And then you feel bad about yourself. Because
right. The first 3 steps weren't done, but I did 4 and 5. Yeah.
Right. The neurotypical world looks at you and says, what's your problem? No, so I have two thoughts happening at the same time, which I do all the time. One is that instead of doing a to-do list every day, another thing that helps people with ADHD is the last thing you do at the end of the day, write a list of what you did that day. because now the next day you can compare yourself over time. You can get a sense of how much can I actually accomplish in a day realistically, not what I think I should do, but what did I actually do? And sometimes on that list, item number 1 is I got out of bed, and that's enough. Like, that's acceptable. That's accomplishing a thing. But that helps me, because when I try to write a to-do list, part of my problem is I don't do a good job of estimating what can I get done in a reasonable amount of time, because one of the problems with ADHD is your sense of time gets screwed up. So instead of writing a to-do list, write down a done list. And that gives you a much clearer sense of what can I accomplish in a day. And then tomorrow you can either beat it or you can not quite meet it. And over time you develop sort of an average. And that's for people with ADHD, that's a much more, a much gentler, self-caring sort of way of keeping track. Because I understand you still want to keep track and hold yourself accountable. That's a much gentler way of doing it than demanding upon yourself, do a thing that you don't know if you're going to be able to accomplish.
Right. I think that is more in line with the way I operate organically, because it's easier for me to reflect and to say, well, I was able to accomplish these things, but going forward to kind of have that gauge of, well, what can I do forward? And it's always, my lists are always bigger than the day.
I'm saying, and then at the end of the day, you feel crappy because you're like, oh, I didn't meet all of the items on my list.
Right.
And so if instead I can say, after a while, I have a sense of, okay, here's how long it actually takes me, to do it, so for an episode, for instance, my episodes tend to be between 60 and 90 minutes long, depending on who I'm talking to. And by the time you add in an intro and an outro and music and stuff like that. And I don't edit the main body of my episodes very much. So of that, let's call it 75 minutes. Of that 75 minutes, 60 minutes is basically not edited. It's plunked together. And so theoretically, I should be able to put together an episode in an hour, maybe 2. Right. And that was in my head for a long time. Like, that's what I should be able to do. And that word should, I hate that word. That's one of my least favorite words in the language. I tell people all the time, don't should all over yourself.
Okay.
Because it's just unhygienic. Don't do that. Don't should all over yourself. Because it turns out for me, it takes about 4 hours for an episode, because I have to take a lot of breaks. I check in on Facebook. I check in on Twitter. The kids interrupt me. I need to listen to music for a little while. I'm hard of hearing, and so I edit visually rather than auditorially. And so there's just a lot that gets in the way. And so accepting, no, getting an episode out is a 4-hour process, not a 2-hour process. That took learning. And that took measuring at the end of it rather than setting time for myself at the beginning of it.
I like that. I'm actually going to use that. I'm actually going to use that, because I think that having another frame of reference or another way of thinking, because a lot of people are just like, well, if this, influencer, this person, this whatever is able to do it, like, everyone should. And that's not the standard. And so just like we talk about, how do we deal with isolation? How do we deal with the necessity that we've grown accustomed to with the illusion of motion? And we talk about, the how do we prepare ourselves for accomplishment, things like that. It's hard to measure ourselves against other people and how they do it. And so I think that I'm grateful that, you came on to, talk about other ways we can look at it, other ways we can review it, because I probably would have never considered that, the way that I group my to-do lists and not look at it as a sequential order list, but actually looking at it as, here are some items that need to be accomplished. Which one can you tackle first?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then at the end of the day, having something reflective to look on. Okay, what did we accomplish today? You know, and not just like, well, before I go to bed tonight, tomorrow I need to know what I need to accomplish, because to me, that's like, already anxiety. Like, oh gosh, I have to accomplish these. Oh, what happens if I don't? You know, like what happens if I don't accomplish it? But if at the end of the day I can say, well, I was able to accomplish these things, I think it helps to better my mood, as opposed to, you know, diminishing what I have already accomplished and continuously looking for, well, next week, next year, next month, all that kind of stuff. And so like that's really cool. Like I feel so much better.
I'm so glad. You know, and I would say parallel to that, the other thought that I had at the same time is that, you know, in most cultures, but especially ours, we have sort of set up this rubric that says that adults organize things by stacking them up vertically.
Yes.
To get technical, screw that. Like
my papers are all over the floor.
And to me, that is something that I had to learn, because before I had ADHD, that was comforting to me. At the end of the day, when I was done with all of the things that I was going to do, I put everything else in a nice, neat pile, and it looked nice and neat to me. And I was like, cool, there it is. And I knew what was in the pile, and I knew what had to get done the next day, and that was great. That's fine. That helped contain a sense of anxiety. And in the past 5 years, dealing with ADHD, I've learned that creates tremendous anxiety, because one of the issues with ADHD is that because you organize differently, we tend to be horizontal organizers. We tend to cope better when we can see things all at once. And so I can look at a desktop that looks cluttered to somebody who's got a normal brain, and I can immediately go through and be like, okay, I had to do that, this, and that, and I'm going to leave these other things for next week. And I function great with that. My husband about loses his mind when he sees that, because he likes everything in a nice, neat pile and alphabetized and organized. He's a math professor, so you know.
Oh yes.
So but for me, like that is how I function. And there's an anxiety within ADHD that I'm going to forget something. That's sort of one of the brain weasels that does speak, is this constant feeling of I'm going to forget something. And if I can see everything all at once, I function much better. So for instance, when I had my space that was in the basement, even though it was sort of cobbled together, I had a whiteboard, and I had a list of, here are the episodes that I need to release, and here are the people I need to make appointments with or whatever. Here are topics for future episodes, that kind of thing. And they were all on this whiteboard, and I could see them all at once, and I almost never looked at it. But I knew it was there, and I took some sort of comfort. It was like a comfort item for me to know that I had this thing there. And now that's in a storage facility somewhere, and I have all of the same information in a notebook. It's all written in, you know, sequential pages, and it closes up and it sits on my dresser. And I have this constant grinding anxiety that I'm going to forget, an episode that I promised to be out by a certain date, or, you know, I'm going to forget to contact somebody, or I'm going to miss an appointment that I have with somebody to talk to them or whatever. And I spent a lot of time feeling like there's something wrong with me, because grown-ups can function well by stacking things vertically and putting them in notebooks. And then I realized, no, I function just as well as other grown-ups. I just can't stack things neatly when I do it. And so they look at my stuff and see clutter. I look at my stuff and see everything. Like everything at once. I don't need to go through. I don't need to run the mental processor to think of, okay, what am I forgetting? What might I forget? What do I have to do tomorrow? What do I have to do the day after that? No, it's all right there. Look, bang.
What I just realized as you were talking is that I do a lot of translating back and forth. So what may seem chaotic and everything all over the place, that's my version of organization. But when I have to teach it to, or tell it to, or explain it to another person, I have to do it in the quote unquote adult way, where everything is in a list, everything is neat, everything has a line drawn of where it goes, so that you can see exactly what the flow of the work is and what the thought process is. And it's interesting. Like I never considered that translating part of it. That was just how I have learned to deal with other people and trying to explain my thought process, or explain an idea or something, whatever it is that I'm explaining. It's like, okay, well, A to B, B to C, C to D, and explain it like that. But all the letters are jumbled up. It looks as if somebody took like all the puzzles and threw it up and it just landed wherever it landed. But I know exactly, like you said, I know where everything is. I can put my hand on whatever it is you need. But because we have been conditioned to think that this is what adults are supposed to do, this is how it's supposed to look when it's neat, that's when you know it's right. And so I've like learned how to translate that to seem quote unquote normal, and to seem like I know what I'm doing. Like I'm not just some raging college student who can't figure life out. Like I figured it out. Like I can translate my thought process so that other people can understand, what the message that I'm trying to get out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that may, like, there's a degree to which that's necessary. Like you need a shared language.
Right.
And sometimes that language is not verbal, it's procedural, or it's body language, or, there's other ways of communicating instead of just words.
Right.
So like there's a degree of that. I absolutely. But at the end of the day, I think the amount of time we spend as human beings beating ourselves up for the ways that we don't meet our perceived societal standards is just vicious. It's just, we spend so much time with that. And
True.
And I've spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks, especially really getting on myself about, look, my computer's right here. Like it's on a rolling cart next to my bed. I can do all of the same things that I do when I'm in my office in the basement. Why am I not getting out so many episodes? Why am I not? Because normally I put out 2 to 3 episodes a week. And right now it's been 10 days, I think, approximately, since my last episode. And I've been really beating myself up over that. Like, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. And it's like, well, it's not an excuse. It's just a reality that I need a different physical space to get more work done. And I cannot spread out in the way that I spread out in my workspace. I had a workspace that wasn't dirty. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't, I'm not good with mold or bugs or anything like ugh. That's the difference between, I think, ADHD and hoarding, right? Is that,
right,
when it gets to the point where you can't see everything because you've got layers and stacks, that's when it starts to become a little bit unhealthy. But with ADHD, it's like when I have everything spread out, my husband's like, oh my God, your desk is a mess. Because for, 3 months at the end of the last school year, we had to share office space. And so he would look at my half of the room and be like, what are you doing? And I'd be like, that's here, this is here, that's here, don't touch it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't go over there and mess your stuff up. You don't mess my stuff up. And I functioned well. And I was getting out episodes frequently, and it made me happy, and I was doing well. And then it's only been in the past couple of weeks feeling in this contained space where I have to function vertically, and I can't. And that's when, really realizing, like, you know what? No, that's society talking. That's not me. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm a high-functioning individual. I'm just not a normally functioning individual.
Wow. This conversation, definitely, I'm glad that we had this conversation. Like, I'm so glad that you like accept the invitation. Like, you have opened my mind to so many things, and it helps me to feel more normal. I like that, like, when I can talk to other people and they have experiences that, even though they're different from mine, there are similar themes in there that that can help like bind our experiences so that we can like you experience this too. I experience it. Oh my gosh, same. And so,
Right?
and so being able to do that, like I definitely appreciate you. You can definitely if you want to plug in any of your socials or your podcast that you have.
Sure. My show is called Ignorance Was Bliss. And the reason for that is that, the sort of the tagline is, didn't you feel better before you knew that? That once you understand something, you kind of can't unknow it. I started off very true crime because forensic psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I needed a break from the darkness of it and from the heaviness of it. And I'm also profoundly lazy at times. And so I don't want to do the research. And when you're presenting a true crime case, like it's really important to get the details right and the narrative clear and that kind of thing. And I just want to talk to people. I just want to collect stories. I want to find out what makes you tick. And if what makes you tick is talking about a 14th century French serial killer, then cool. I'll do the research. We'll make that happen. But if what makes you tick is talking about your anxiety or your travels or your experience as a parent or, whatever it might be, cool. And so that's what, after about, 50 or 60 episodes, my show sort of evolved into more of a just collecting stories. And so I don't record my intro or outro until after we're done talking because I don't know what we're going to talk about. And I'm almost at 300 episodes now, which is kind of proof that I know it's a sickness, right? But it's super fun. It's the best thing. And so my socials, I'm at IWB Podcast everywhere. And the Ignorance Was Bliss Asylum on Facebook is the name of my group. If people want to join, even if you don't listen, like my family's in there, they don't listen. They're tired of listening to me as it is. But but that it's, deliberately named Asylum, both for the concept of you can go in there and be a little off kilter or a lot off kilter, and that's okay. But also it's a safe place to be. And, I'm on Twitter all the time. I have a Discord, although it's pretty quiet right now because I just got it started. And it's just meant to be a matter of, jump in for an episode that you're interested in. Don't listen to one that's not your cup of tea. And it's been super fun. It's been you talk about like, what did I learn from quarantine? And what I've learned is that I need the illusion of motion, the illusion of freedom, even if I don't literally have it. What I've learned from podcasting is how much I had missed just connecting with people, just the connections, the chance to talk to somebody and just whether you're BSing with them or having an intense conversation in a moment like that's. I've been on disability for several years now and had sort of resigned myself to this is it. I'm going to play a supporting role in my life for the rest of I'm going to raise my kids and be done. And I'm not going to be useful. I'm not going to be productive anymore other than as a supportive actor. And finding this podcast and finding these connections and feeling like I'm getting to know people and they trust me with their stories and they listen to me and put up with me babbling at them. That's been magic. And so it's been fantastic.
Oh, well, I can't say enough. I greatly appreciate you for coming on. And oh man, like I know that the listeners will definitely, there's so many aha moments that we talked about today. But thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Take Up Space Podcast. I've been your host, Leah, here with Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss. Be sure to check her out. And be sure to tune in next Tuesday. We'll also be live on Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. So we'll see you then. Thank you so much. You have a great one.